This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio+10. Welcome back past listeners and new listeners to Physio+10. Our special guest today is Professor Jill Cook. Welcome, Jill, to Physio+10. Thanks for giving us your time today.
My pleasure. It's always good to talk things physio and tendon, I guess.
Yeah, well, as we sort of spoken before, it's nice for particularly new graduates to look down the pathway of their career and think, now, this is the things that I would like to aspire to, and that person's led the way, so maybe I can walk in their footsteps for part of my journey. So can you give us a bit of a background as to where you started off in your schooling, just your family sort of side of stuff, Jill?
Yeah, it's a long time since I've been asked something like this. So I was just a very ordinary person. I grew up in 3 or 4 different states. So I had 3 or 4 different primary schools and 3 or 4 different high schools. But all public schools. So one in Adelaide, one in Tenterfield, one in Melbourne, another one in Tenterfield, and then further on from there. So 3 or 3 in Melbourne. So yeah, very diverse, but very, very public schools. So never really, my parents didn't really value education, which is quite interesting for where I've ended up.
Were your parents in the health sphere?
No, not at all. No, my dad was a mechanical engineer. He was a pretty amazing man. He did his mechanical engineering. He was in the first cohort at Footscray Tech in 1944. Then he got his fitter and turner's license, and he got his boilermaker license, and he got his electrical engineering license, and he just was a lifetime learner and an amazing person. And my mum stopped working. She was a seamstress. She stopped working when she got married and was a housekeeper basically for the rest of her life. So I think my learning and love of learning came from my dad.
So when you just said earlier that your parents didn't value education, it sounds like your dad had an immense valuation. Was that because of the gender? You're a female?
I think that they were never exposed to education as an important part of life. I think they fell into education. Certainly my dad did. And he sort of, I think they thought that you just worked your way through it. You know, there was never any talk of additional learning or specialised learning or, you know, private schools or anything like that. It was just get out to school, get your work done, you know, and if you're good enough, you'll get through. I don't think they were ever taught or ever thought that there was another way of highlighting education, I guess.
Okay. And where do you fall in the family structure as far as siblings and stuff?
Second. So I've got an older brother, 2 years older. He retired when he was 40 because he worked with remotely operated vehicles, undersea remotely operated vehicles, and made squillions of dollars very early in his life and retired. And my sister's 10 years younger than me, and she works in childcare. And yeah, she's very happy in that environment.
Yeah. So moving through the primary school and the high school, like what actually then sparks your interest in physiotherapy if it's not in the family?
This is a crazy and truthful answer. When I was an avid reader, I read every single book in the Tenterfield library, I think. And I read a book about occupational therapy, and I really immediately liked the concept of it, but I was terrible with my hands. I used to fail sewing and at school and things like that. Couldn't do anything with my hands to save myself. And then I learned that there was an exercise version of occupational therapy called physiotherapy. And from the minute I realized that, that's what I wanted to do. So I would have been about 10 and never, ever changed my mind from that perspective. Worked my whole high school career towards that goal.
Wow. I don't think I've had anyone on Physio+10 have made that decision so early in their educational process.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fascinating. It was there was just absolutely no way I was doing anything else as a profession or in my education, basically.
Wow. So where did you end up choosing to study physiotherapy?
I was at Lincoln Institute, so that was prior to Trobe University here in Melbourne. And that was the only place that you could do it in Victoria. My parents were in Victoria at that time. They moved interstate once I'd started my university education. But yeah, that was the only option. And again, same thing. I had no concept that there was any other option. It was Victoria, Lincoln Institute. That's what you did, basically. I didn't realise that there were options, I guess, at that stage.
That was your whole world, Victoria, at that stage of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I did my last 2 years of high school here in Victoria, and yeah, just straight on to university from there.
Yeah. And how did you find that university experience in comparison, say, to high school?
Oh, yeah, it's an interesting thought. It just was. It was never much in terms of you know, engaging in the university experience. Everything outside of your learning. I was never in the clubs or anything like that. We lived quite a long way out of town, so getting to and from university was quite a prolonged time to do that. And I, yeah, but I loved the learning. I just loved, you know, is exactly what I wanted to do. And I really, really enjoyed the actual education part of it. And it was so interesting in that experience. The very first day of physiotherapy, I'm never telling anybody these sort of stories. First day of physiotherapy, I walked into the group that was to be my first year, and everybody knew everybody. And I thought, how on earth is this happening? How come I don't know anybody? And the answer was there was a PLC group and an MLC group and a Brighton Grammar group and I was from Nidri High out in the west. And you know, I think there were about 3 people from the western suburbs in my year. There was about 4 men. Everyone else was a woman, and almost nobody from a high school. And that was a really confronting experience. But you know, you get on, you get you achieve, you find friends, and you know, do your university basically.
So recounting that story and saying you had that big travel basically to and from each day, I'm guessing you're talking buses and trams and that sort of transport. Does that mean you didn't really attend many of the social sort of engagements that are attributed to physio?
No, almost none. And again, because there was those already established social friendships with people, it was very hard to sort of fit into that. And you know, I worked on weekends and some nights and stuff, so there was not much opportunity. But I didn't feel like I missed out. I was really quite happy. I had my own, you know, social environment, my own sport and stuff, so I was pretty happy. But yeah, no, I didn't engage at all. In fact, I didn't even know where Norton's pub was. Norton's was the place to go, and I didn't actually even know where it was to be able to go to it. So yeah, no, not very much at all.
Here's an off-the-wall question then. So when did you first get tipsy or drunk in your university years?
I actually didn't even start drinking until I was outside of physio. I was a very late person to alcohol, and I'm making up for it, don't worry. Yeah, so no, not during physio at all. I never, and because you don't engage in, I didn't engage as much in the social events. No, even the balls, I was, you know, yeah, no, I wasn't much into alcohol at that stage.
Wow.
Shame it's changed.
Get those brain cells nice and fresh, all that sort of stuff. So what were some of the
conscious
highlights?
decision.
Oh, was it? Okay. What were some of the highlights for you then going through those? Was it a 3-year diploma probably back then?
I was the first year of the degree course. And that was a bit of a schmozzle because they actually hadn't sorted out the course at all, and there were great gaps in it. And we did 3.5 years and almost no, between third and fourth year, almost no break over Christmas to try and cram everything in. The highlights were, I guess, for me, finding out how diverse physio was, just being exposed to, a burns unit and cardiovascular, cardiothoracic sort of physio for all its, perks and otherwise. And neuro and things like that. I had no idea the options open to me for when I graduated, because I'd come in with, I was a bit of a sporty sort of chick. I came in with the exercise and let's get fit and active and all of that sort of stuff, as many people do. But all of a sudden just realised there were a lot of options. And I was particularly interested. I did a spinal placement in my undergraduate part, and I was absolutely enthralled with spinal injuries, and thought that that's where I would end up.
And
well, I did. Oh, well, after a while, I didn't talk about it either. I did come back and apply for a job at the spinal injuries unit at the Austin, and they appointed internally, and they said, come and work here, and when the next job comes up, you can have it. And I said, fine, I'll come and work here as long as I don't do medical rounds, chests and post-surgery and all of that, because by that stage I'd been out probably 5 or 6 years, and I just did not want to do that. And then, of course, I got there, and what they did is dump me on medical rounds. And I didn't last very long. I lasted a couple of months, got another job offer in private practice, and took that up. And so that was the end of my interest in spinal injuries. I don't know what would have happened if they had given me a job. I don't know. But I ended up in that.
It's so amazing when you talk with people like yourself and you find how their career was on a trajectory, and then almost something incidental or another person's decision or an unperceived outcome flutters up towards them, and their course just changes on a dime, and
Yes.
what they thought was going to be them for life, all of a sudden it's not.
Yes, I would never have picked where I have ended up. Who knows what the other options would be, but that was certainly a change in direction for me, because that was what I was passionate about, and it proved not to be the career I took.
It reminds me so much when I used to read Richard Bach's books when I was sort of in my mid-20s, and that sort of concept of parallel universes. And I often wonder, if I made that decision, what would I be doing today, having gone down that different pathway?
Yes.
Can you remember when you did first graduate, like what did it mean for you to become a physiotherapist and have that piece of paper?
I don't remember that being particularly important to me. I went, my first job was at Western General, which is now, I think, Western Hospital or something like that, in the, physiotherapy department. So rounds, rotations and all of that sort of stuff. I think I remember a lot about, I moved into a share house. I remember a lot about what I did outside of physio, not so much about what I did, except I think I was pretty surprised about the autonomy that you had in those days. You got dropped onto a ward, and then you had to organise yourself and find your patients and work out who was sick and who wasn't. And there was very little direction, I guess. That was surprising, and I thrived in that environment because you're making decisions yourself. You've got to be able to justify them. You've got to get everything right. Being dropped into an intensive care unit with really sick people, it was it was fantastic to feel like you contributed, to have the ability to make good decisions or decisions yourself about your patient care. Nobody looked over your shoulder. It was just go and get that lot done and fix them up, and that was it.
Just listening to your story there, given that you worked, given that you lived at home, traveled backwards and forward to uni, it almost sounds like you really only got to spread your wings after you graduated. Did you then
Yes.
move away and you met some other people and you lived in a shared house and you had a job, you had some money? Is that when you discovered red wine?
Yeah, my parents shifted out on me, actually. They moved interstate and left me in Melbourne because I didn't want to travel again, go somewhere else. Yes, I think so. All of a sudden it was the nest had gone and you had to create your own nest. And that's fairly confronting. You've got to find it, you've got to find a good place to live. You've got to find friends and you've got to find a social environment as well as your work environment. And I know they combine, but yeah, I guess so. Even then, it was Benin Moselle time, and that was pretty disgusting. I didn't find red wine for a while after that. I still struggled as a drinker, even then. I think I grew into that a little bit later.
How did your career develop over those first few years once you had graduated? And what were sort of some of the key decisions that you followed through on?
Oh gosh, there was only one decision. When I learned about physio when I was 10, I also learned about travel and all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to go overseas from the age of 10 as well. So my whole career at that stage, for 18 months, I was at Western General. It might have been 20. All I did was work and put money in the bank. And by the time I decided to leave, which is about 18 months, I had enough almost to buy a house. In those days, houses were about $20,000, would you believe? Wow. And I just dropped off the face of the earth and got a one-way ticket to London and left and traveled for 3 years. And really I did a bit of sort of locum work for physio, but I, worked on farms in Europe. I made roads in Poland. I traveled, went to Canada, spent 9 months coming home through Asia and Middle East. And yeah, came back 3 years later, and that was, I think, I think that's the making of you. You can be in some pretty weird places in the world. I was in Cairo when Sadat was shot, and I was watching the parade when he was shot, and all of a sudden you had to get out of the country. You couldn't really stay there. You just didn't know about the stability of the country. All those sorts of things are pretty amazing. And so that 3 years was very much the making of me, and probably where I did discover red wine.
So you came back to Australia. Did you come back for a specific reason?
I think I'd run out of steam, I think, for travel. I really think I hadn't seen everything. I hadn't been to Africa or South America, but I'd been most other places and really felt that it was time to come home. I don't know if it was time to come home. I just decided that it was time to come back. And that's when I was really unwell when I came home. I had every bug in Asia that you could possibly pick up. So I spent some time with my parents in Narracourt in South Australia. They were at that stage. So I worked in the local hospital there for about 3 months until I got some condition back. Then I came back to Melbourne, did the spinal injuries thing, and then started working private practice pretty quickly with Peter Duras. You might be a blast from the past, but Peter was one of the very much the innovators in sports physiotherapy, certainly in Melbourne. I'm not sure, people around Australia would be familiar, but he had a private practice in Melbourne, and I started work with him.
Okay. And at that stage, I guess we need to sort of start asking some questions about when did the world of dual Cook and tendons start to merge, or like what was the precursor of that?
Yeah, interesting. So after a couple of years with Peter Harcourt, who's a sports physician, was looking for somebody to work in his practice as a physio, and he'd been recommended that I might be interested or might be the right person. So I started working in his practice. So that was at the start of Alphington Sports Medicine Clinic, of course. And he was a basketball nut. He was with the Australian Boomers and with Coburg Giants in those days. And of course, that's where I ended up working with basketball. And that was, gosh, when was that? 86, 87, shows you how old I am. And so we had all of these players with patellar tendinopathy, jumper's knee, big, tall boys, you know, absolutely crippled by their knee pain. And of course, in those days, this will surprise some people, there was no imaging, there was no ultrasound or MR or anything like that. So there was no ability to actually sort of image the tendon at all. There was, it was an anti-inflammatory, rest, ice and anti-inflammatories was the treatment for it. And it was soul destroying. It was, you know, here you are as a physio offering them ultrasound and frictions and things that were making absolutely no difference to them. And I very quickly got sick of that and started to read a bit in the literature, and then just fell into some really bad research, basically trying to get some prevalence data and you know, some ideas about management from other physios and stuff. We never published that. I don't think we ever published that. It was pretty ordinary research. And then yeah, just sort of developed from there. So I guess I needed answers at that point to help the athletes that I was trying to work with.
Yes, it really was driven by a needs basis.
Oh, absolutely. Every single thing that we've done in tendons or research is driven by need, clinical need. That's our primary goal in everything we've done, is answer something that clinicians are going to benefit from, because it's pointless doing anything else other than that.
Yeah. So what happened then?
Well, again, you know, I was blundering along in research, doing a very bad job without a mentor, without anybody to direct me. And Karam Khan was working at Alphington at that stage, and he was doing his PhD at that stage, and he sort of started to help me, offer me some advice. I started, I found somewhere to do a PhD at Griffith University, would you believe? Looking at the genetics. I was really interested in the genetics of tendinopathy because I really felt there was something happening there. And so enrolled up there. And then as soon as Karam finished his PhD, I became his first PhD student, would you believe? And he really just pushed me through that PhD because I was working. I had a 2-year-old. You know, I had obviously my own practice. I was working with about 3 or 4 sports teams, and I was trying to do my PhD at the same time. So Karen was amazing in terms of getting me through that period with an outcome that was satisfactory, I guess you'd have to say. But yeah, can I share a story with you that really, again, I don't think I've ever told anybody. So Ray Borner was an Australian player. He played with the Coburg Giants. We became the North Melbourne Giants. And he had really bad patellar tendinopathy. He went for surgery because we had nothing to offer him. And he came back. The surgeon said you can play at 6 weeks. And I remember sitting on the sidelines, and he was running up and down the court, having to lock his knee back because he had not insufficient quad to actually load it and into any sort of flexion. And I sat there and I thought, geez, we need to get that a bit stronger. And it was so interesting. So that's what we started to do. And that's when everything turned around for him. He immediately started to get benefit from it and to feel less pain and improvements. And that's where all of the sort of loading for tendinopathy started, just from that incident. You know, sitting there and thinking, oh, something has to change here for that player. And yeah, developed it from there. So it's serendipitous, isn't it? You just, something changes your life in a way you just never would expect.
And your clinical gut was saying to you, we need to strengthen this, we need to load this. Can you remember the types of exercises that you started then? Because you had nothing to base it on. What did you actually go for?
No, Alphington had a Cybex machine, would you believe, at that time? It was just complete. It was the biggest white elephant, the $30,000 white elephant it was. But we certainly would have used that. I don't actually recall exactly what we did. I don't think I was confident enough to toss leg extensions and things at him. I don't think we had the equipment to do that, or the ability to do that. I don't physically recall what we did with him. We certainly would have used Cybex, but it could have been something like squats and step ups and, you know, all of the pretty rubbish things that we do now, but was sufficient to change him from, literally he couldn't flex his knee in weight bearing, so because he had no quad strength. And yeah, I don't recall what I did.
Yeah, that's amazing. You completed your PhD in, I think, 2000. What was the thesis title?
Patellar tendinopathy clinical and imaging studies. So it was a sort of a collection of different studies. So it really was thrown together a little bit of just things that we'd been able to do, studies we'd have been able to do. So this was the first time really that ultrasound had been used in tendons. So there was this famous paper that I quoted in my PhD. There's a guy called Millimarchi who said, if you have pathology on imaging, you have to have surgery. And he was talking about patellar tendon, and gee, that's interesting. Or Karen probably thought it. I was just, you know, a pleb running along beside him. And so what we did was, again, Karen helped me con an ultrasound company into giving us a machine, which was the size of a mini minor at that stage. And we carted it around to all these basketball and netball stadiums and imaged every single knee we could. And what we found, of course, was there was so much pathology in asymptomatic people. And there, that was really one of the big bases of my PhD, was to show that you can't rely on imaging to guide you in terms of what you do. And here we are, probably 25 years later than that publication, and we're still telling the same story. We are still seeing people whose decision to rest or to have surgery or anything is based on imaging. And I can't believe that I can talk so consistently and repetitively about the same thing and actually make minimal impact clinically on some people, basically. Pretty frightening.
I think what you're saying is that you're surprised that 25 years later, people are still making decisions based on imaging, isn't it? That's what you're saying.
Yep.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter now whether we talk about heel spur plantar fasciitis or subacromial pain syndromes or even lumbar spine pathology with, you know, 50% of people in that age of 40 to 50 with disc protrusions and asymptomatic in all situations. And it's that someone was telling me about knowledge translation. Getting the knowledge from the research field and into the clinical brain takes 30 years or something like that. And it's a bit of a scary factor, and it's something I'm trying to work hard against with my sleep research. Just some very basic concepts that every physio could apply, and I'm sure it would be applicable to at least 20 to 30% of the population. They just need to know that it's available, and it's very simple. And that concept of imaging is likewise very well entrenched and simple.
I think the answer for me is laziness. You know, you don't have to think through a clinical reasoning process if you can look at a picture and make a decision. And I think physios used to be like that. I think we're much, much better now at realizing, not always, but on the whole. But I think the medical profession it's not anything to do with whether they're good at clinical decision making. It's the way they're brought up, basically, that if the imaging looks terrible, this is what you do. But it makes life pretty easy for you. You don't have to think through anything and, discuss options and educate and all of the things that we, spend our life doing now. So I think that's one of the reasons it's very hard to sell the message. So I think their education is lacking. And then I think it's a time factor and I said laziness before, it's probably a poor word, but it's just a simple reasoning process. I think that's why it's hard to change.
Yeah, I think the time is another aspect, because
Yes.
with the time comes education. I think and I talk to our GPs here and say, look, if someone's got complex pain, say their pain or their low back, I understand you don't have the time to educate them on their habits, their attitudes and beliefs, their exercise level, their nutrition level, how to have strategies to manage their pain when it flares. That all takes time. So, and it's several half-hour appointments. It's not 1 10-minute session. You've got chronic low back pain. Here, take this oxycodone and I'll see you later in 2 weeks' time. It's not getting better.
Yeah.
Well, it's not going to get better now you've started that treadmill of opioid dependency. So it's educate and say, look, it's okay if you don't have the time to do it. Just send them to us. That's what we're skilled at doing, and we do allow the time to cover that sort of process, because it's only going to get better through exercise, nutrition, education, and changing sleep habits. So it's
yeah, and I would love to think that it was that easy. And you probably see exactly the same issues that I do, is that you say send them to a physio, and they go to a physio and they get rubbish. They get, a poor exercise selection, they get poor education. And for me, and I guess for you, it's the average physio doesn't see a lot of tendons and complex tendons and highly loaded tendons. So again, it's not their fault, but we used to run, we don't anymore because of COVID. We used to run a clinic called what we called the Desperate and Dateless Clinic. So everybody we saw fitted that description. And, everybody used to cry on us because we'd say, don't worry about your pictures and don't worry about, not loading this, everything they'd been told previously. We said, no, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. So even if they had seen physios, GP had done the right thing, sent them to a physio had been unable to or not knowledgeable enough to do the right thing, and then they fall further behind because they've then tried, they then see a surgeon, I've tried physio, it didn't work. I hate that expression, I tried physio. What's that?
Yes.
So yeah, we just got to keep talking. I think that's the only answer. Is we've got, and you know what? Again, you probably are familiar too. You can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and still not get a message across. So to give you the funniest example of this, Ebony and I did a course in Denmark, and 2 days of talking and practical and tendons. And the last question we got was from a girl in the front seat, and she put up a hand and she said, can I use this to treat a sprained ankle? And I thought, oh my goodness, what a waste of those 2 days. And you will never be a physio of any significance because you just haven't understood a single word I've said in 2 days. It wasn't as if I was a 2-hour lecture or a half-hour lecture. It was a 2-day course and she still had no idea. So anyway, I'm sure that's a familiar story to other people that are trying to get their research ideas out there.
Yeah. Well, we can do a little time out there and do a little marketing thing and say that Ebony has done an online course, and you can access that through AAP Education's online education portal. So that really doesn't leave you an excuse. It's called lower limb tendinopathy, and it covers all the tendon stuff that you would normally see in any lower limb pathology. And it's an absolutely awesome. It's only a 1.5-day course. So if you really want to know the difference between the different tendon approaches and the theory and the research, It's just there. It's a brilliant course, and as you know, Ebony is absolutely a bee on wings when it comes to enthusiasm. So definitely look at that one. We'll put some links in the show notes afterwards for that. Thanks for that, Jill.
Perfect. And Ebony's brilliant at tendons, so I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, she's awesome. Now, Daniel Radcliffe had found it pretty difficult stepping out of the mold of Harry Potter. With your long research in tendon research and education, do you feel boxed in by the perception that you are the tendon girl?
Oh, no. Harry Potter had an outcome. He got rid of Voldemort, and so there was an end to that story. There's no end to tendons. I'm just developing a lecture at the moment called "What We Don't Know About Tendons and How Does That Affect Our Clinical Effectiveness." And I don't even know where to start. There is so much that we don't know about even the tissue processes and how we influence them in them. I mean, we can get better clinical outcomes than we used to. Absolutely, no doubt about that. But why we get them, I'm not sure we know. Why people fail what we consider to be a good program, we don't know. Why people don't get symptomatic, we don't know. So I certainly don't feel boxed in, because there's so much more I want to know. And the second thing is, as an academic, I'm not boxed by tendons. I've done work in low back pain and posterior ankle and hip and all sorts of things that you do when you take on a student who wants to do research in a particular area. So you have these other areas that you are exposed to, which is one of the joys of academic research.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, like, putting tendons aside, are there other areas that you I feel very passionate about that perhaps other people don't know about?
Well, they probably know about it. I'm absolutely passionate about strength and conditioning and the absolute rubbish that we're taught in undergraduate courses. As a physiotherapist, we're meant to be the loading experts. We're meant to be the exercise experts. And we're giving people clams as an exercise for lateral hip pain, and we're giving people wall squats for patellar tendinopathy. And, we have no idea. I did a tweet ages ago, and, people, something about physios don't understand load. They don't understand high load. They don't know how to apply exercise. They don't know how much exercise to apply. They don't know how much pain to elicit for most conditions. And then the last point was they've never been in a gym themselves. And you can't be a physio unless you go and push some weights and work out how much you can increase them and what it feels like to go deeper in range and how many reps affect you. And, I couldn't be more frustrated by our education, and I couldn't be more frustrated by seeing patients in the desperate and dateless clinic who've been doing exercises that are completely inefficient and ineffective, and they're never going to get any better with those exercises. And that's as good as we can do as a profession. That drives me completely nuts.
Well, that's pretty. I think that's the thing. And I was amazed that we are these exercise therapists, and yet during our whole undergraduate, we never went to a gym. It was only my, I guess, personal interest and experience in rock climbing and wanting to be stronger. And I'm a tall, skinny, lanky, no muscle man completely. So I did need to get some sort of muscle on me, and it meant going to the gym. And I was surprised that we just did not do. We had a Cybex too, and it sat there in the corner there, and you looked at it and it was, don't touch, it's too expensive to talk to, let alone use. But yeah, I'm just surprised. Like, gymnasium strength and conditioning is just something that we need to have in our undergraduate.
Absolutely. And can I congratulate? Yes, sorry.
No, that's fine.
I can congratulate La Trobe, because they have instituted a strength and conditioning unit in their undergraduate physio, where they have to undertake an 8 to 12 week program and be able to prescribe exercises. We've got exercise physiologists now who are prescribing exercises and things for injured athletes and stuff. And again, they're caught in that they know the exercise, but they don't understand the injury in the process. So we're both sort of operating from half knowledge, I guess. And I think, you know, physio is a much better place to get better at the exercise prescription, to be able to help people more than perhaps the exercise physiologist can come the other way and fully understand injury and the process of healing and all of the things that we've learned as physios.
Yeah. So to a budding researcher listening to this podcast, what would be your 3 recommendations, say, based upon your experience for them to consider?
Okay. I think the most important thing is passion. I do see people coming into wanting to do a research degree, wanting a PhD, the outcome being the piece of paper, not the outcome being to do the research and to answer some questions. So you've got to be passionate. You know, it's not easy doing it, as most people know. And if you don't want to know the answers, then I think you're really pushing whatever you want uphill. And then I think the second thing would be the people I've seen just flourish in research is a good mentor, somebody who can guide you. I was extraordinarily lucky to have Karam as my mentor, and you know, still probably one of the people whose opinion I would rate more highly than anybody on many things. So I think that's absolutely essential. And if you can combine passion with good mentoring, I think that's would be the most critical thing. And then the third thing I think is, a lot of people think that you can, you know, go into research and everything, you know, you're going to have money to do things and everything's, you just got to work your bottom off. You absolutely have to be sitting in basketball stadiums all weekend and at nights, and you know, to achieve the outcomes that you want. You have to expect that it's going to be hard and that you have to do the work yourself, and there isn't any other way around that.
Yeah, there are many long dark nights when it comes to a PhD, and you want to have a very strong focus that provide you a bridge from one dark night to the next.
Yep. And you know, outside of data collection, then there's all of the data management and analysis and writing, and you know, you got to learn to write. You know, I can't imagine what my writing was like when I first started. Karam's a grammatical Nazi in some ways, and you know, you just get smacked around at so many levels in a PhD. You know, you've got to learn your data, you know, analysis, and oh my goodness. So you just got to be resilient. You just got to you're like one of those clowns, you know, that keep coming back up every time it gets hit down. You know, you get people who drop out of your studies. You know, you've followed somebody for, you know, 12 months and you need them once more and they don't come and won't come. And oh my goodness, yeah. Research is not easy, as you know.
Yes. As a physiotherapist, what would you say is your number one goal?
Oh, don't know that I have one. I retired in December. I'm still working, of course, but officially I'm retired.
That's retired from what, Jill?
If I wanted to put it in a way, retired from feeling like you have to do everything. I think just the constant, this has to be done and that has to be done and that's your job and all of that. So that being able to step back, I stepped back today. One of my students sent me an ethics application, and I just said, no, I'm not doing that. You know, you've got other supervisors who can review your ethics application. I'm not doing that. I'm not, you know, I am now officially not proofreading one more paper ever and not reviewing any ethics application. No, I'll do other things. I'm happy to. So I think just being able to pick and choose the parts of research that I really love. I love editing papers and writing. It's one of my favourite tasks of all time. I can take 1,000 words and make it 200 pretty easily. And
with a red pen.
Hey?
With a red pen.
Yes. And just, developing the research questions, working out your populations and your outcome measures and thinking that through and working out what's possible, all of the things about research that are fun and just not all boring stuff anymore.
Yeah. So you're saying you're still at the university as a professor, but you're still in clinical practice as well?
Well, Ebbs and I used to run the D&D clinic, and COVID shut us down because we were working out of the VIS. And so, we were no longer able to physically see patients. I think I probably get 12 emails a week from people saying, could you help me? I've got this and that and the other. And I do occasionally get engaged in that. It's very, very unrewarding work, can I say? Because you've got to unpick everything that we talked about, the dependence on imaging, their fear of loading, their misunderstanding about what's happening, all of that. They're in the US, you're doing this at 10 o'clock at night because that's the best time that you can work it out. They don't believe a word you say. It's not particularly rewarding. So I've started to say no to those. Less and less clinical work. I have to get back to that. But every time we try and step in that direction, COVID shuts us down again.
Yeah, okay. Looking at your clinical portfolio of patients that you do see, have seen, might see, would like to see, what would you say is the most common piece of advice? I can hear a couple of threads coming through, but in your own words, what would you say is the one or two common pieces of advice that you give most of your tendon clients?
Fear of loading is by far the biggest thing we see because of where they've come from. They've seen a GP who said to rest, they've had an image, they've got a report that says they've got degeneration or a tear in their tendon. Their aunt's torn their rotator cuff and their shoulder's never been the same again. And they come so unloaded and so fearful of loading that we can spend hours unpicking that. Sometimes our consultations in the D&D clinic used to go for 2 hours, and most of that was unpicking all of the stuff that preconceptions they came with. That's by far the most important thing, is that loading is a good thing. We can load you successfully without hurting you. That will make you better. That's by far our biggest advice. And I guess that encompasses all the education that we've talked about, why loading is okay and why unloading is not good, and all of the key things that we need to tell people with tendon injuries.
Yeah. As a physiotherapist, I guess, / researcher, what would you say is the hardest thing you've learned or had to learn?
I think that you can't do everything. You have to pick and choose. It's come to me very late in life that, and probably only since I've retired, that it's okay to say no to things. I've come very close twice in my career to running into a wall through far too much work and saying yes to everybody. And I can remember my husband was a physio as well. And, one Christmas morning, somebody from basketball rang and said they'd hurt their back, and our whole Christmas day was disrupted because he said, yes, I will go around and see you on Christmas Day. And, learning that you can't do everything for everybody all of the time. I still get phone calls. It's really interesting. Phone calls from people who I haven't heard from probably for 10 years, and then they've hurt themselves and they ring you and say, oh, Jill, I haven't seen you for years, and I'm just wondering if you could help me with my XYZ. You can say, it's okay to say, no, I'm not helping you. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's probably something that there's a fine line between doing a lot and being very engaged and not nearly killing yourself on the other side.
I think that's a really important piece of advice. Particularly, we have this thing called a Strive and Thrive in Private Practice online course, and along with time management, which is one of the big issues that new grads come to me about, it's looking after yourself, like preservation of your own self, and not feeling like you have to say yes to everything, because basically burnout is a reality, and you're no good to anybody if you're burnt out or you've lost the passion because you are just fatigued. You just got emotional fatigue or physical fatigue or job fatigue. So I think that learning that preservation of self and the core is an important skill to develop.
I think it's essential, and I think maybe you're talking about people dropping out of the profession. I think one of the reasons is that this is not a 9-to-5 job. I used to dream about being a Safeway checkout chick, because you could take nothing home. You worked 9 to 5 and you went home and you could drink your red wine and have a relax. Well, you go home from a physio career and you've got, your notes that you haven't quite written up, and you've got the phone calls from the athletes, and you lie in bed wondering, have you given that person too many things to do? And oh my God, they might get worse. And should you have sent them to the doctor? And should you have done, it's that perpetual nature of your job that I think is puts us at risk of burnout.
Looking across the span of your physiotherapy career so far, what 3 things stand out for you?
Oh gosh, in terms of that's a hard question to answer. In terms of what I've achieved, do you mean, or do you think
what do you feel proud about? Like, I mean, people there's ego and there's being proud, and I think it's okay for you to be proud about some of the things you've achieved. What sorts of 3 things do you think, hey, I'm really happy that I did that? I'm pretty proud about that.
Yeah. Well, in my early career, we treated everybody with rest ice and anti-inflammatories. Now we load them and they get better. I would think you would have to be proud of
that's a significant change.
Oh man, it's a significant change. And at the risk of blowing my own trumpet, we've driven all of that, and I think, it's okay to say that, because we have, we established the 4-stage program probably in the late 90s. And I was thinking about this earlier. There's now 2 RCTs where it's been compared to other treatments, and both have shown effectiveness. One of my students is doing one in hamstring tendinopathy at the moment, so it'll be interesting to see if that again shows to be beneficial. So you'd have to say that was a big achievement. Probably the second biggest thing that's ever happened to me, and it's a visceral feel, I can actually feel it, was walking into the stadium for the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Not even being in the stadium, just walking, you could hear the crowd starting to roar as you walked in. That was an amazing experience. Money can't buy that. Hard work buys you that. Competence buys you that. But yeah, I couldn't, that have to be one of the highlights of my career. And I guess just all the opportunities I've had with travel and stuff. I've seen some amazing places, met some amazing people. I have a lot of friends now internationally, and that's it's a privilege as well.
If you could jump into your own little portable TARDIS and zoom back to your younger self, what would be 3 bits of advice you give to the young Jill Cook graduating from Lincoln?
I have no idea how I ended up here. If you said, did you plan all of this? I would have to say I had no idea this is where I would end up. And even looking back over our research, I think I don't even remember doing that research. Or so I think the things, I don't think I would have had any advice except to the 2 or 3 things I did is I took every opportunity and worked as hard as I possibly could. And I think that's just the way, people approach life. And I don't think I would have needed that advice back then. As to where I am now, I think it was serendipity a little bit. I don't think I chose my path, and I don't think I could have told my younger self to do X, Y, and Z, aside from jump on everything you can, have a go. I did so much work for nothing. Not expecting to be paid for all of the hours I sat on courtside. But gosh, I got some amazing friendships out of it. I got some amazing opportunities out of it. I don't know that I would have had any advice for myself back then because I don't know how I ended up here, basically.
I think in a way you are giving yourself advice. You're saying take the opportunities, don't decline an offer, be willing to work hard. And I think, particularly in sports, but I know talking to quite a few sports professionals that have gone on and done a lot of stuff, that's literally what they've said, is that it's not what the qualifications are, but who you know. And you know those people because you've sat on the bench and you've just been there. And it doesn't matter whether it's in motor racing or it's in basketball or in Aussie rules footy, the people I've spoken to, they said the same thing. You've got to, in sports particularly, put the time in and be there. And it's through those relationships that when an opportunity arises, they're always going to turn to you first and say, well, are you available or are you interested?
Yes, but also not making sure you don't get so close to the edge of too much that you almost tumble over. And I think it's certainly in sport that can happen. You can be running 2 or 3 teams as a physio, not getting paid very much, being out till 10 o'clock at night. That's hard.
Yeah. Just backtracking, did you walk into the stadium with Purds? Was he in that 2000 Olympics?
Yes, he was. And even more importantly, I walked in there. My husband was a physio, and I walked in with him. And that's pretty special. There wouldn't have been very many husband and wife teams there. Olympics is amazing. A home Olympics is something that if you ever get an opportunity to grab.
Awesome. Hey, you're looking forward now, 5 years down the track. Where do you see yourself?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I retired, as I said, in December. In fact, I was offered a redundancy and I took it because I thought, yahoo, this sounds like a good idea. And I would have said, I don't think I would have retired unless I'd been offered that, because you always feel you need to be needed all of the time. It's very self-fulfilling for you to have students and to need to be doing things. And I would have said in retirement, I would have needed to keep, and I still obviously have students, I still have a position, so I'm still doing work. I can't believe how easy it has been to walk away from many things. I can't believe how easy I think it will be to even decrease work more in the next 12 months. It's pretty hard when your profession and your life are so linked, to walk away from your profession and still find that you have a life. And I think that's the balance that I've got to find. It might be just no more proofreading, no more ethics. That might be enough. I don't know. I think I'm 6 months now. I would still like to decrease work a bit, but just exactly what and how, I don't know. I think time will tell, but I think within 12 to 18 months, I will be doing less again.
And in that process of doing less, what do you see yourself doing more of?
People, this is the most ridiculous statement. When people retire, they say, I haven't got any time. I'm so busy. And then and you think you can't possibly be busy. You're not doing anything. And the answer is you are. You are. You change what you choose to do. And you fill your life with other things. And it might be something really small and ridiculous. I do have to do some more volunteering. I've applied. There's an interesting thing. I actually volunteered for a position with some animal welfare and didn't get the job. So that was pretty confronting. I had to put my CV in, which was about 30 pages long, and I didn't get the job. So there you go. There's some interesting things. But yeah, I'd like to give back to the community a lot more. And not perhaps give as much back to academia and physio and research.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that the transition from working to retirement is challenging. Maybe it's other professions, but I can see for physio particularly because we do get so much short-term serotonin hits from helping people and having that sort of constant sort of contact where we're in the driving seat and we're helping people. And that does, inflate the ego somewhat. So when you take that away, people can be lost in thinking, well, where am I? Who am I? What am I? What's my role in society? So I think that is a bit of a challenge for some people. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to replace it. How you do that, I think, is just an experiment. You try something, and if that doesn't work, you try something else. And maybe you will and maybe you won't find it. But I've got a lot of friends who have retired who are still passionate about their work and still, they're in their 80s and they're still going hard. And I just don't think that's me.
Yeah. And just looking forward, we talked about the profession. Where would you like to see the profession of physio develop over the next 5 years?
Aside from the things that we've talked about, I think healthcare has to change. I think there has to be extended scope practice, not dissimilar to nurse practitioners, where we're not dependent on the GPs who know nothing about musculoskeletal injuries to make, the clinical decisions. That's going to be a hard transition. I know it's happened in Britain and that's, been successful. So we have to work out that with, whether we can do the same thing here or not. But I think we lose people to the profession because they're very, very intelligent people and they need more than what physio offers them. I think physio does give you an ego and a serotonin hit, but I'm not sure it gives you the level of decision making and the importance of the decision making that you sometimes need. Deciding whether to do clams or pulley work is really not decision making, is it? It's working out, do they need immobilization or not? Do they need medication or not? And we sort of make those decisions, but we have to actually channel it through someone else, and I think that's really hard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jill, that has been exceptionally enlightening. Very lovely to speak to you. I'm sure people that listen to this will have some insights that they didn't have before having listened to you, and I thank you very much for that. And I just wish you all the well in your retirement.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for allowing me to share things that I actually have never ever told anybody else. So it will be interesting to see if anybody actually cares at all, but we'll see.
I'm sure they will. Thanks heaps, Jill.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio+10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe. Bye for now.